Thank you. Let's be seated, please. Thank you, program directors, Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition, Minister Ibrahim Patel, ministers and deputy ministers here present, and chairpersons of the Industrial Development Corporation and chairperson of the National Empowerment Fund, the leadership of competition authorities, representatives of labor, business, and industry bodies, and ladies and gentlemen. Minister, thank you for taking us through the whole repertoire of the type of food that you like and you consume from morning to evening. I was quite interested of the full itemization of the food you like, from peanut butter to pizzas to pap to juice, fruit, as well as a beer. Much as I know that you don't consume any intoxicating beverages, I was quite intrigued. Maybe I need to look at you more closely. It's a great pleasure to be here. And let me start off by saying that I always have a conflict of interest whenever I stand on a podium to speak on any subject. But I'd like to declare that this morning I have a much bigger conflict of interest, so I want to declare that up front. I do so having worked with workers for the better part of my life, 9 years, in the National Union of Mine Workers, and as being part of COSATU. The subject that we are addressing today is very close to my heart, so I'd like to declare my interest, because it is one of those subjects that I and many others did champion for many years. And we championed this as trade union leaders. We would see how the bosses, the management, got share options in the companies that they led in their great numbers. And workers were always excluded from participation. Management teams at a high level would always have a double-barrel type of earning opportunity. There are very high salaries, as well as the dividends that they would earn from their share options. And workers only had their salaries. And we thought for the longest time that this was unfair and inequitable. And it is for that reason that we joined the campaign to ensure that workers are also included. And this, in many ways, was in keeping with the whole principle of inclusivity, but more importantly lately for us, leaving no one behind. Because if we ever can give credence and credibility to the notion of leaving no one behind, it is in this area of worker ownership. So it is therefore for me a great pleasure to be here. Now, this first conference on the state and future of worker share ownership schemes in South Africa is taking place at a very important time Firstly, we are marking 30 years of freedom. This gives us an opportunity to reflect on progress in transforming our society as well as our economy. Since 1994, we have made concerted effort to address the racial and economic injustices of the past. We have enacted competition laws that have opened doors for small and medium-sized enterprises to flourish and to be more inclusive on an economy-wide basis. Working with our social partners, we have introduced labor laws to foster sound labor relations and ensure decent working conditions for all. I'm always intrigued by some who say that we've got labor laws that impede progress and economic development in our country. And whenever I ask them about singling out those pieces of legislation, they never come forward with coherent views and proposals. Yes, there may be one or two that we need to look at as we move forward, but in the main, the labor laws that we have passed have been labor laws that have been able to develop our labor legislation landscape in line with the International Labor Organization conventions. We have pursued policies to foster entrepreneurship and to empower Black South Africans in the economy. Black South Africans who were deliberately, by law, by convention, by tradition, excluded deliberately from participating meaningfully in the economy of their own country. And I often say that if there was any iniquity that was done to the people of South Africa, is how we enabled this economy to operate not on all cylinders, to operate, if a car or a truck has 6 cylinders, to operate just on 2, leaving out the other 4 cylinders. Because I often say, had our economy been made to operate on all cylinders, when all the people of this country were involved meaningfully, directly and deliberately, in playing a role of ownership, of management, of directing the economy, our country's economy would have been far bigger, it would have grown much more exponentially as to be able to create jobs. Through that, we would have fostered competition, and competition is good because it creates companies that are able to innovate and create more people. Our economy was deliberately crippled and staggered for a number of years by the exclusion of the majority of our people. And that is why our economy is where it is today. Many people don't always reflect on how our economy was crippled by not enabling it to operate on all cylinders. This year marks 20 years since we took steps to open up the economy, to have more inclusion, directed, inspired by the Freedom Charter, which our forebears drafted 1955, but also inspired by our Constitution, which directed us to have full equality, equality of opportunity, equality in every aspect of South African life. So this year marks 20 years since we took another deliberate step, since we passed the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, which was promulgated as one of the most transformative pieces of legislation to come out of a democratic South Africa. And of course, based on the iconic document of the Freedom Charter, but which was then encoded into our Constitution, that formed the foundation to enable us to begin the process of transforming South Africa. Yet, despite the measures of successive democratic administrations that we have introduced to transform patterns of ownership in the economy, we still have much more to do. The inequality that still persists in our economy is often seen even by outsiders. The International Monetary Fund always says that the South African economy is hamstrung, is held back by the concentration of ownership, and in part by the concentration of opportunity. The World Bank has actually done the same. So much more work still needs to be done when we come to the transformation of our economy. This is therefore a good time to collectively assess the impact of the enabling legislation environment, to examine the learnings over the past 2 decades. And a vital measure of economic empowerment is the extent to which ownership and control of the economy is broadened, particularly among Black and women South Africans. Worker ownership schemes, therefore, are valuable. They are valuable instruments to broaden ownership and, with time, to enable greater control of the economy. In my view, they are not only valuable, they are natural. Because invariably, in most companies, you will find a coterie, just a few of those who work for that company being favored with a piece of the equity in the company, and the majority being excluded. That has now begun to change. As known, also known as the employee share ownership programs, these schemes are underpinned in our transformation era. They're underpinned by the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act, together with the Competition Act, as well as the Companies Act, and a various number of other pieces of legislation, for instance, in other industries, mining and many others. Government continues to play an important role through DTIC in providing guidance on the design and implementation of these programs. The IDC, the National Empowerment Fund, and other key government institutions provide catalytic funding and assistant measures to enable this to happen. Worker share ownership schemes furthermore complement the Black Industrialist Program that we inaugurated a few years ago, which provides another means through which the government can contribute towards more equitable ownership in the economy. In 2019, we enacted changes to the Competition Act that have helped to advance worker ownership. The amendments require government and competition authorities to significantly or specifically consider how an acquisition or a merger will affect the spread of ownership in the economy, particularly for workers. The amended legislation also calls for the engagement with emerging companies to implement structures that enable greater and much more meaningful participation of workers, not only as owners of equity, but also as stakeholders with a voice. The immense transformative potential of worker ownership schemes is often overlooked, and Minister Patel is absolutely right. The media and many other opinion makers hardly pay attention to this very important aspect. I guess the only attention that ever hits the headlines is how a CEO of a company will be selling their shares, their share options, and getting hundreds of millions of rands. That is when it surfaces. And sometimes it surfaces at AGMs when the remuneration committee comes forward to say this is how we want to remunerate the management team. Workers are hardly ever mentioned in that type of conversation. Now, we have come, that is a very weak applause. Maybe it's coming from workers. It's coming from workers. Because it is possibly workers who say, we've always been excluded, which is true. That's why I declared my interest. And they are having a go at the management people as well. Now, we've come a long way from the early days of Black economic empowerment, where instances of workers as stakeholders in companies were rare. You might recall that when we started with the broad-based Black economic empowerment, it was largely seen as an opportunity to bring in your Black entrepreneurs and later your communities. But for the most part, the workers who worked for those companies that produces the orange juice, the pizza, and the beer that Minister Patel was talking about were often excluded. And they were almost like just objects, and not even their interests not even heeded, except for the wages that they earned, even in the boardroom. Now, the impact of these schemes were relatively limited at the time, in part because of the finite nature of the respective arrangements. In the intervening years, these efforts have picked up pace considerably. According to a study that was done by the DTIC, today in our country, more than 500,000 workers are part owners of the companies they work for. And I still think that this is a conservative figure, because I think many more workers in various companies have now become owners, part owners of the companies they work for. And by the way, workers don't even demand that, we want all of it, like Karl Marx style. They never say, give it all to us. They just say, we want a portion. We want a portion to be set aside, and that portion we can either have funded, buy-in, or, as often happens with companies, it can actually be a share ownership scheme where it incentivizes worker and it is parceled out. Now, this equates, if you look at the 500,000 only, it equates to 1 in every 20 workers in the formal private sector working in our country. We are creating a new class of worker owners across the country. And this is a new wave that must spread around, and where we want to give dignity to workers, as these are not just managers, they are workers, they are in many ways ordinary workers who produce that orange juice, who work on the farms, who are mine workers, who are now amongst the owners of our country's vast mineral wealth. Mine workers own a portion, and There are workers in garment and auto manufacturing industries who are now amongst the owners of the factories that they work for. There are workers in the agricultural sector. There are workers in the food and beverage sector, hospitality, energy, transportation, and logistics, in IT, in the financial services, in telecoms, and many others. Now, these are the Tinzwalos, the children of democracy, who are striving to give effect to the words of the Freedom Charter that the people shall share in the country's wealth. This is why this conference, in my view, is so important, the first of its kind. It is an important opportunity to acknowledge the successes of existing employee ownership schemes, to raise awareness about their existence, their potential, and explore strategies to promote more of them within and across more sectors. And this is a good thing to do. In 2018, I had the privilege of co-chairing the International Labour Organization's Global Commission on the Future of Work, where we were looking, and I was working with the former Prime Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven. We were looking at the future of work and brought together experts around the world at the ILO in Geneva. And the Commission's report reflected not only on what choices countries need to take to adapt to a rapidly changing world, but a world, as Minister Patel was saying, where there's climate change, a world where there's great uncertainty at an economic level and all that, but also on the critical issue of achieving social justice in the world of work. How we can engender equity, equality, and fair treatment of all who are involved in economic endeavors. In a number of respects, worker share ownership schemes are just such an investment towards the achievement of greater social justice. And the concept social justice is so important for us to always keep in mind in whatever we do. There needs to be social justice. There needs to be fair treatment of everyone, inclusivity, and we need to underpin what we do with the concept of leaving no one behind. These interventions are necessary for the sake of equal opportunity and addressing the historical inequities and inequalities, particularly in a country like ours, but also towards increasing productivity and the growth of the economy. You see, in companies, when they give your top CEOs, your top managers, shares, they say they are doing so to incentivize them to be more creative, to be more innovative, and to generate growth for the company. And quite often they leave the workers behind. And yet the workers are the real engineers of getting growth in a company, because once they are well incentivized, they themselves will walk through brick walls to ensure that there is more growth. And in my view, what is the difference? To enable and empower a CEO with, millions of shares and also a worker. They both need incentivization. They both need to have a sense of equity, a sense of ownership. And once you do that, you produce people who are going to lead to the growth of the company. So employee ownership schemes offer employees access to the share of, yes, the profits and the growth that is generated by companies to which they contribute their labor. Blood and sweat goes into growing those companies. And those workers need to be incentivized to be remunerated in exactly the same way, obviously on a proportional basis, as your top managers. Moreover, they give workers a seat at the table where strategic corporate decisions are made. I've often made this point, and trade unions in our country have always been very reluctant to sit also on the boards of the companies they work for, because the tradition has always been the employers are the enemy and we cannot sit down with the enemy. I forever remember when I was in the National Union of Mine Workers, for the first time when we went to negotiate with the bosses at the Chamber of Mines. As we got into the negotiating room, they started offering us tea, everyone tea. The workers said, "General Secretary, we are not drinking the tea from the enemy." And I then said to them, like Minister Patel was saying, "This is your tea. This is your tea. It's made by your fellow workers. We must drink it." And we were there the whole day. And as they got hungry, the sandwiches that were brought, they also took. Because the view that they took was that, no, we cannot take anything that's given to us by the enemy. And we had to work to try and change that approach amongst the workers. And I forever remember, and I must confess to have participated in a theft. When we were at the Chamber of Mines, they used to have the cigarette boxes. That's the time when in boardrooms there used to be a lot of smoking. So they had these cigarette boxes, and they were accustomed to negotiating with the White Mine Workers Union, who, you know, as they came into the boardroom, there were like maybe 5 or 6. So they would each help themselves to the cigarettes, puff away. The room would be filled with smoke. I used to smoke too, but I stopped many years ago. My children said, "Stop this nonsense," and I did. So the one time when we first went to the Chamber of Mines, they had these boxes. So somehow the workers opened them and found the boxes, these wooden boxes filled with cigarettes. And I could see they closed them very quickly. And as they refused to take the tea, and I knew that some of them were smokers, because we had come with a very big delegation. I mean, we had like 35 workers from all over the country who were coming to the Chamber of Mines for the very first time. So it was like a joy, and none of them were in suits. They were all in, you know, overalls and all that, which was a bit of a shock to the Chamber of Mines establishment. And during one of the caucuses, I then instigated a crime. I said, one of them said, "Oh, I didn't bring my cigarettes." And I said, "Open this box and smoke these cigarettes away." They said, "Yes, can we do that?" I said, "You take the cigarettes." And you know what they did? At the end of the session, they took all the cigarettes. So the next time we came back, there were no cigarette boxes. That was worker empowerment. So now when workers participate as owners, the workers also develop a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities that face their own companies, enabling more fruitful partnerships to unlock opportunities for growth, investment, and job creation. Now, this is a paradigm shift which aims to empower workers not only as wage earners, but also as partners, as stakeholders with ownership in capital. Now, trade unions have often thought that this is going to weaken their resolve. It's actually going to make them sweetheart unions. It's going to weaken their revolutionary fervor. And I say, as opposed to that, it actually gets workers to understand more. And it does not mean that they may not go and sit at the table as negotiators for higher wages, because they will understand more. The same obtains in other countries. In Germany, for instance, they have this co-determination process where workers participate in the management board as well as in the company board of directors. So we have now embarked on a new era. Now, beyond the principle of social justice, worker ownership initiatives make sound business and economic sense, in my view, as I alluded to earlier. They are key to building a more resilient economy whose benefits flow equitably through society. One of the issues that is often raised as a complaint with regard to our economy is that there is less productivity in our economy. And yes, if we want to boost productivity across the economy, we need to make sure that those people who produce the wealth of the country, those people who work to produce the growth of their companies, are well incentivized, they are well encouraged, and they feel that they are part of the company that they work for, and that there is no alienation whatsoever. Worker share ownership initiatives boost the morale, as well as I said, the productivity. They make workers feel that we are working for ourselves, and we are able to give more, much more than what we would ordinarily do. And I would even hasten to say, it would also deal with issues of shrinkage. If you talk to many company executives, they will tell you that they always factor 3%, 5% shrinkage, because yes, people being who they are, they always pilfer, they always steal, and they always find ways of defrauding and all that. Now, when you know that this is part of yourself, that you own a portion of this, and that you are well regarded in your company, you are well treated, there's equity, the incidence of theft, the incidence of defrauding will be lessened, because you will know that when you do so, you are actually stealing from yourself. So I do believe that the benefits, other than promoting morale, productivity, are way beyond what we can ever imagine. And I think if this is done on a wholesome basis, it will boost the economy. I remember one time when I was still in business and I talked to my executives at the company that I led, and they said, Chairman, we want to also have a piece of the action. And I said, what do you want? And they said, we want equity. They said, once we have equity in this company, we will run through brick walls for you. We will literally go through concrete walls, because then we will commit ourselves much more. So this, in my view, is so important. Several studies have shown that worker ownership also fosters greater innovation within companies. Yes, it fosters that. I was associated with a telco company when I was still in business, and one time I saw this fellow who looked like a ragamuffin, who was walking around in techies and with the baggy pants. And I said, who are you? What do you do here? He says, no, I'm paid to think, and I'm also a shareholder here. And because I'm a shareholder, I feel really sort of uplifted, and I think, I innovate, I come up with new products, new things, and I feel that this is a part of my own company. And that is what share ownership schemes do. Workers who feel valued and respected by their employers are more likely to contribute, as I was saying, ideas to improving processes, products, and services. It is human nature that one is more inclined to contribute one's best efforts when one has a vested interest in the success of that particular venture. And it is human nature for people to say, what is in it for me? And I find that in politics all the time. When you talk to people, they say, okay, President, but at the back of their minds, as I look at them, I know that they are basically saying, what is in it for me? Because that is our human nature. It's inherent in us. So we must know and remember that if we want to promote loyalty, productivity, lift morale, that's precisely what we should be doing. So this conference is an opportunity, in my view, for meaningful dialogue among a diverse array of participants, including trustees, CEOs, labor and business representatives, and company chairs. It is an opportunity to develop a model of worker ownership that can serve the needs of our economy. And I will not go into the various, permutations of schemes. You should be able to do that. While there has been a focus on expanding the number of worker share ownership schemes, insufficient attention has been given to enhancing the impact of many of these schemes and unlocking their full potential. Moving forward, we will need to address key issues such as developing best practice, funding and dividend policies, and enhancing governance structures. Now, many company owners will say, but why should I give a portion of my company to workers? And there are many ways of skinning the cat, many ways of crafting an inclusive participation by those who work for the entity. And some companies even have phantom schemes where the real equity base is never denuded, and processes that renew, schemes that renew themselves even as workers exit and come in and so forth. So worker ownership must also deal with issues of black economic empowerment. It must be a mechanism for wider economic inclusion. We need to expand the reach and the impact of share ownership programs, strengthen the legislative and regulatory frameworks, and foster greater collaboration with all stakeholders. We should seize this opportunity to create networks and enable knowledge sharing, as well as improve the impact and the reach of existing schemes. So I wish to thank the Minister of DTIC and its various agencies for all the work that they have done in creating and enabling the environment. Of course, this has been inspired by the laws that we have passed in relation to other industries, mining and many others, and we have now reached a point where we are perfecting it. The progress that has been made would not have been possible, truth be told, without the collaboration of the state, labor, the private sector, and other stakeholders in the economy. So I congratulate companies. Those companies, many of those companies are represented here today, who continue to work to implement such structures in a collaborative way with their employees, who've also shown courage, and it will be good at some stage to hear their experiences, whether it has brought about any positive change, and if it hasn't, how we can ensure that that is engendered. We all share a common commitment to economic transformation. I do believe that that is now common amongst all of us. By definition, it has to be common, because if we look at our past, where, as I was saying earlier, our economy was crippled and was not operating through or with all cylinder power, we now need to say transformation is the way to go, so that we open the valves, we open all the cylinders to enable this economy to operate as it should, as we spread ownership, as we make sure that there is involvement by those who produce the wealth of this country. It is therefore vital that we harness the spirit of partnership as we chart the course for the future of these programs and for an even better, more sustainable worker shareholders regime. And by the way, I want to say that I look at this endeavor as going way beyond just worker ownership. I see it having a positive impact on our economy, on our transformation agenda, on productivity, on driving the economy forward. Imagine how positive and beneficial it would be to get everyone in a company having a sense that I own this and therefore I am going to work hard. We often see it with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs will sacrifice their time, even time with family. They'll sacrifice, everything, their own personal life and even some of their assets, and they'll put them to bear to grow their companies because they own it. They want to make it succeed. And we can have a light version of that by getting workers to be part of the economic growth, the growth of the companies. By championing worker ownership, in my view, we are building a future where every employee has a stake in the success of the company. But in my book, as I said, the success of our economy. Together, we are paving the way for a more equitable and prosperous society in which no one is left behind. When we inaugurated a few years ago in this administration, when we inaugurated the minimum wage, that was another process through which we were lifting 6 million workers out of a milieu of low wages. The doomsayers then said, we're going to have a bloodbath. Many people are going to lose jobs. It never ensued. What it means is that as South Africans, we need courage. We need to be bold to embark on processes that may seem new and risky to us. But if we do have that courage and boldness, we will be able to ensure that no one is left behind. If concept of no one being left behind has ever gained any meaning in any country in the world, it is in South Africa where it should, because many people were deliberately left behind. And in this administration, and I guess in the next administrations as well, our insistence is going to be, we leave no one behind, and we must be as inclusive as we possibly can. So I'm delighted to be here. I've declared my conflict, and I say to you, have a wonderful discussion during the course of this conference to advance what I believe is fully transformative for the economy of our country and our nation. Thank you very much.